How would you react if your husband brought his mistress to your funeral? Imagine a church with 200 grieving people, and in the front, a mahogany casket holding a pregnant woman who died under very strange circumstances.
How could you do this? You saw
Suddenly, the
everything,
doors
Marcus.
fly open.
Jessica,
Her
please,
husband
I can
walks in,
explain.
holding hands
wasn't
with
like
the
that.
woman he was cheating on her with for months.
How dare
But there
you
was
do
a
this?
secret no
I
one in
demand
that
you
church
release
knew.
me right now.
The wife in that
I
coffin
have
was
done
no
nothing
victim.
wrong.
She was a genius. Everyone thought she was just a sweet, elementary school teacher making worksheets about butterflies. In reality, she was quietly building a $47 million empire. While her husband was scheming to take everything and disappear with his lover, she was recording every single lie, every crime, and every betrayal. And she left a video. It was a video meant to be played at her own funeral. A video that would bring down everyone who ever thought she was weak. You will not believe what happens next. You have to stick around for this, because nobody saw the final twist coming, not even me. This is the story of Rachel Morrison, and it is about how a dead woman got the last laugh. This story will teach you something powerful. Silence is not weakness, patience is not surrender, and the quiet ones are always the most dangerous. If you've ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or told you were nothing without someone else, this story is for you. Stay until the end, because the lesson here could change how you see your own strength forever. The mahogany coffin was at the front of St. Andrew's Church, looking like a monument to a terrible tragedy. It was surrounded by bouquets of white lilies and the soft glow of candles, which made shadows dance on the polished wood. 200 people filled the old pews. They were all dressed in different shades of black, and their faces showed the kind of sadness that comes from losing someone who was far too young. The air was heavy, with the smell of flowers and expensive perfume, but underneath it all was a feeling of complete, beta, and total disbelief. And at the heart of it all, inside that stunning casket that cost more than what most people earn in a month, was Rachel Morrison. She was 32 years old and an elementary school teacher. She was a loyal friend, a mother-to-be, and now she was gone. I was standing in the third row from the front, holding a tissue that was already soaked. My black dress felt like it was squeezing my chest, where my sorrow had settled like a heavy stone. My name is Claire Bennett, and the woman in that coffin was more than just my friend. She was my sister, in every way that truly counts. We had been best friends since we were 7 years old. For 25 years, she was my partner through every good time and every bad decision life sent our way. 25 years of friendship. That meant secrets, whispered in the middle of the night, tears that were wiped away, and so much shared laughter. It meant late-night phone calls that went on until sunrise and Sunday brunches, where we fixed all the world's problems with mimosas and pancakes. Now, all of that was finished, ending here in this cold, stone church, with its high ceilings and stained glass windows, whose bright colors felt like they were making fun of such a dark day. Rachel was 8 months pregnant when she passed away, carrying a little girl she had already named Hope. The baby made it. She was delivered by an emergency C-section just as her mother's body was shutting down. She was 4 pounds, 2 ounces of pure fight, lying in the neonatal intensive care unit. She had no idea that she would never meet the woman who already loved her more than anything, who sang to her through her own belly, and who spent countless hours choosing the perfect soft yellow for her nursery walls. The doctors said it was due to complications. They threw around terms like an unforeseen infection, rapid organ failure, and a shocking decline. They just shook their heads and said in quiet voices that sometimes these things just happen. They said that medicine doesn't have all the answers, and that they did everything they possibly could. But I knew something that the doctors did not. I knew Rachel had been perfectly healthy throughout her entire pregnancy. I knew she had that special glow that only expectant mothers have. I knew that she was strong and full of life, planning a future that should have lasted for many, many years. And I knew, with a certainty that felt like a rock in my stomach, that something was terribly wrong with how fast her health collapsed. The priest was talking, his voice a smooth, practiced drone of comfort and Bible verses that flowed over the crowd. He talked about God's grand plan, eternal peace, and the promise of seeing loved ones again in heaven. I could hardly hear him. My attention was locked on the coffin, on the arrangement of white roses laying on its lid, and on the framed picture next to it. It showed Rachel looking her absolute best, smiling right at the camera, with one hand on her pregnant stomach. That is when the heavy wooden doors at the back of the church creaked open. The sound echoed through the quiet sanctuary like a gunshot, silencing the priest in the middle of a sentence. Every single person in the church turned around to see what caused the disturbance. For a moment, the bright afternoon sun coming through the doorway was blinding, creating silhouettes of two people. Marcus Morrison walked into his wife's funeral as if he were showing up to a business meeting that he found slightly annoying. He wore a charcoal gray suit that must have cost at least $3,000. His dark hair was perfectly in place, and his face had the easy confidence of a man who, in his 35 years of life, had never been told no. He stood tall, walked slowly, and had an expression that could almost look sad if you did not get a close look at his eyes. But it was not Marcus that made everyone in the room let out a collective gasp. It was the woman with him. Jessica Crane strolled into that funeral, holding Marcus's hand, as if she had every right to be there. She acted like she belonged right there by his side, not like she was the other woman, the mistress, the person who wrecked a home by sleeping with another woman's husband while that woman was carrying his baby. She was 28 years old, with that kind of expensive, professionally highlighted blonde hair that takes hours at a salon. She was beautiful in a manufactured way that suggested personal trainers, strict diets, and a skincare regimen that cost more than some people's car payments. Her black dress was a designer label, probably Valentino, tailored to flaunt her body while trying to look appropriate for a funeral. Her heels were red-soled Louboutins, and they clicked on the marble floor with every step. The sound was disgusting in the sacred silence of the church. I watched her walk up the center aisle on the arm of my dead best friend's husband, and I felt a coldness spread through my entire body. Behind me, I heard Rachel's mother make a sound I will never be able to forget. Betty Johnson was 61 years old. She was a small woman who seemed even smaller because of all the hardships she had faced. She had worked double shifts at a truck stop diner in rural Tennessee for 30 years just so her daughter could have a chance at a better life. She had driven for 14 hours without stopping to get to this funeral, likely in the same old Honda Civic she had owned since Rachel was in middle school. She had already buried her own mother and her husband, and now she was burying her only child. And through every tragedy, she always carried herself with a quiet strength and grace that made everyone around her feel humbled. But seeing her son-in-law walk into her daughter's funeral with his mistress finally broke something inside Betty Johnson. She let out a sound like a wounded animal, a cry of pure agony that sliced through all the whispers and gasps, and her legs gave out from under her. I managed to catch her right before she hit the floor, wrapping my arms around her small frame. I could feel her whole body shaking with sobs that she could not hold back. I learned a very important lesson in that moment as I stood in that church holding a grieving mother while her daughter's betrayer paraded his lover right past the coffin. When a person shows you their true colors during their absolute worst moment, a moment when common human decency should be the only thing that matters, you should believe them. This was not Marcus being cruel because of grief. This was not shock or confusion or some twisted way of looking for comfort. This was Marcus Morrison finally taking off the mask he had worn for years. He was finally showing his true self to everyone who had ever mistakenly believed he was a good person. I have seen some pretty awful things in my life. I have seen people reveal who they really are under pressure. But I have never, ever seen someone do it while wearing a $3,000 suit at his pregnant wife's funeral, with his mistress on his arm and a smirk playing on his lips. Marcus led Jessica to the very front row of the church. He took the seats that were meant for family members, the seats of honor right in front of the coffin, holding the woman he had promised to love and protect until death. He sat down and did not even look at Betty, did not even glance at the woman who had raised the wife he was about to bury. Jessica sat down next to him, crossing her legs at the ankle as if she were at a fancy lunch. Her face was carefully blank, except for a tiny smile at the corners of her mouth. The whispering started right away, spreading through the pews like a wildfire. I saw people taking out their phones, from purses and pockets, even though it was a funeral. I saw them openly recording, holding their screens at angles they probably thought were sneaky. By the time Marcus sat down, I was sure the whole disgraceful scene was already going viral online. The gossip was already spreading like wildfire through social media, private messages, and hushed conversations, all while Rachel's coffin sat cold just 20 feet away. The priest had fallen silent. He simply stood at the pulpit, looking completely lost, as the words he had prepared about eternal rest and God's grace now seemed totally meaningless in the face of the drama unfolding. For what felt like a long time, nobody moved or seemed to know what to do. You could almost taste the tension in the air, a sour mix of shock, anger, and something else that felt strangely like excitement. That is when attorney Thomas Whitmore got to his feet. I had only met him once, 3 days before, when he called me to his office to tell me things about Rachel I never could have imagined. These were things that made me question if I ever really knew my best friend at all, and made me see that she was in the middle of a game none of us even knew was being played. Now, the final moves were about to be revealed. He was 58 years old and had that classic look of old Connecticut money, with silver hair brushed back from a high forehead and piercing blue eyes that took in everything but gave away nothing. For 30 years, he was a corporate lawyer before switching to estate planning. He carried the quiet confidence of a man who had seen it all and was surprised by nothing. He walked to the front of the church with calm, deliberate steps, his expression serious. The priest moved aside immediately, giving the podium to this man who was not on the program. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whitmore said, his voice reaching every corner of the room without any effort. There was a quality in his tone that made everyone sit up a little straighter. The whispers stopped, and even Marcus finally looked up from his phone. For the first time since he had walked in, I saw a flicker of concern on his face. "Before we end this service," he announced, "I have been asked by the deceased to read her final will and testament right here, right now, in front of all the people she held dear." He took a moment, his eyes scanning the crowd before they settled on Marcus and Jessica in the front pew. His next words were spoken softly, but they landed like a punch to the gut, and in front of everyone who betrayed her. Marcus's confident posture faltered just slightly. Next to him sat Jessica's perfectly painted nails dug into his arm, her knuckles turning white. Whitmore pulled a large, thick envelope from inside his suit jacket, the official kind that lawyers use. He held it up for everyone to see, before he slowly and methodically broke the wax seal. At that moment, I had no idea what was happening. I did not know what Rachel had been setting in motion, the secrets she was hiding, or the empire she was quietly creating while everyone thought she was just a sweet elementary school teacher who made lesson plans about butterflies and the life cycle of frogs. But as I stood in that church and watched the blood drain from Marcus Morrison's face while Attorney Whitmore prepared to read his dead wife's will, I started to realize something profound. Rachel knew. She had known all about the affair, the deception, and everything they had done to her behind her back. And she had not just taken it. She did not just curl up and fade away like a helpless victim. She had made a plan. I watched Marcus squirm in his seat as 200 pairs of eyes stared at him with pure disgust. And I thought about what none of them knew, what even I had only learned 3 days ago. Rachel had used the final months of her life to build an elaborate trap. And every single person who had ever wronged her, who had ever underestimated her, who had ever looked at her kind face and saw only a weakling, had just walked right into it. To truly understand how we got here, with my best friend gone and her husband's mistress sitting in the front row as if she owned the place, I have to take you back. We need to go back before the betrayal, before the secrets, before the brilliant plans were made in the shadows. We need to go back to the start of a love story that was destined to end with both heartbreak and victory. Rachel Ann Johnson was raised in a trailer park outside a tiny town in rural Tennessee. It was the kind of place you will not find on a map, the kind of place everyone who lives there dreams of leaving. Her mother, Betty, worked back-to-back shifts at a roadside diner. She would come home at 3 in the morning smelling of burnt coffee and fried food. Her feet swollen and her body aching, but she always had a warm smile for her little girl. There was never a father around. Betty refused to talk about him, and Rachel quickly learned it was a topic to avoid. What Rachel did have was a mind, a sharp, brilliant mind, that her teachers saw right away. It made her different from the other kids in their underfunded school district. It made the guidance counselors marvel and say things like, "That girl could do anything if she just got a fair shot." Betty Johnson was going to make sure her daughter got that shot. She picked up extra shifts any chance she got. She started cleaning houses on the side for the rich families across town. She saved every single dollar that was not needed for rent and food, stashing it in old coffee cans, under her mattress, and in a bank account she swore she would never touch, no matter how tough things got. When Rachel turned 17, she was awarded a full scholarship to the University of Virginia. She sobbed when she opened the acceptance letter. Betty sobbed too, standing there in the kitchen of their small trailer, holding her daughter's future in her hands. All those years of hard work had finally paid off. Rachel showed up to college with just 2 suitcases, $300 of saved cash, and a fierce drive to make something of herself. While at the university, she juggled 3 different jobs. She was a waitress at a diner near campus, serving privileged college students who almost never tipped, and older town residents who barely acknowledged her existence. She also tutored students who were struggling in economics and business, subjects she had taught herself by reading library books and taking free online courses. On weekends, she cleaned the dorms, scrubbing toilets and making beds for people who would never bother to learn her name. Despite all of that, she kept a perfect 4.0 grade point average. She was on the dean's list every single semester. She graduated with high honors, earning the admiration of every professor she had. It was there that she met Marcus Morrison. He was her complete opposite. Rich where she was poor, well-connected where she was alone, and possessing the kind of easy confidence that only comes from a life without real struggle. His family's wealth went back for generations. It was old Connecticut money. The kind built on smart investments, family inheritances, and the sort of connections made at exclusive country clubs and yacht parties. Marcus was failing his economics class when the university assigned Rachel to be his tutor. He arrived at their first meeting 20 minutes late, wearing a designer polo shirt that cost more than her entire collection of clothes, and he looked at her as if she were there to serve him. Honestly, she should have just turned around and left. Looking back on it now, knowing what I know, I can see all the red flags that Rachel either did not see or decided to overlook. The casual sense of entitlement, the unspoken belief that his time was more important than hers, the way his eyes scanned her old laptop, her simple clothes, her worn-out shoes. You could see him mentally calculating her value and deciding it was not much. But Marcus Morrison was successful for a reason, and he knew how to read a room. He saw something in Rachel during that first session. Perhaps it was her intellect, or maybe it was her simple beauty, the kind that did not require expensive clothes or heavy makeup to be noticed. Or maybe it was something much darker. Perhaps he saw a young woman who had fought for everything she ever had and figured she would be thankful for any attention he decided to give her. So, he changed his approach. He started arriving on time for their sessions. He would bring her coffee, and he remembered exactly how she liked it after being told only once. He began asking her about her life, her family, and what she dreamed of for her future. And he appeared to listen to her answers with genuine fascination. His pursuit was relentless. He would show up at the diner where she worked, ordering cups of coffee he never drank, just so he could watch her as she moved from table to table. He sent enormous bouquets of flowers to her small apartment, the kind that clearly cost a small fortune. He wrote her little notes that were surprisingly heartfelt for a boy, a man who had been handed everything on a silver platter his entire life. Now, Rachel pushed back at first. She was a smart woman. She understood they were from completely different worlds, that his family would never approve of a waitress's daughter, and that fairy tales are for kids, while happy endings belong to people who do not stress about rent. But Marcus was persistent, he was charming, and he was a master at saying precisely what she longed to hear. "I will never be like them," he promised her one night when she finally confessed why she was keeping him at a distance. "The wealthy kids who look down their noses at everyone, that is not me, Rachel. I love you for exactly who you are, not in spite of your background. Where you come from means nothing to me." And she believed him. God help her, she bought every word. 5 years later, they were married, at his family's private country club in Greenwich, Connecticut. I stood beside my best friend as her maid of honor, wearing a dress I had bought on clearance and altered myself, just watching her face shine with a pure happiness that made my own heart ache with joy for her. Did you know Rachel made her own wedding dress? She designed it and sewed every stitch by hand over 6 months because Diana Morrison, Marcus's mother, refused to pay for a gown for someone she called the help. "Trailer trash does not deserve Vera Wang," Diana had sneered, not realizing I was standing right around the corner, hearing every single toxic word. No matter how much perfume you spray on garbage, it is still garbage. I should have told Rachel. I have replayed that moment 1,000 times, wondering if things might have gone differently if I had just opened my mouth and told her the truth. But she looked so incredibly happy that day, standing at the altar in her beautiful handmade dress, with flowers woven into her hair, speaking her vows to a man she loved with everything she had. I just could not bring myself to shatter that moment for her. Perhaps that makes me a coward. Perhaps it makes me an accomplice in all the events that came after. I have had a very long time to think about it, and I still do not have the answer. The wedding reception was a perfect mix of wonderful and horrible. Wonderful because Rachel was absolutely radiant. The place was breathtaking, and for just a few hours, it felt like love really could overcome the massive gap between their two worlds. Horrible because I had to watch Diana Morrison move through the crowd, whispering poison into every available ear, ensuring everyone knew her precise opinion of her new daughter-in-law. "Give it 5 years," I heard Diana tell a woman dripping with diamonds, her voice just loud enough for me to hear. "A girl from the trailer park is still from the trailer park. The novelty will fade, and Marcus will go back to the values he was raised with." 5 years was Diana's guess. She was off by 3. The first 2 years of their marriage seemed good, at least from the outside. Rachel and Marcus settled into a gorgeous apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. He began his career at a top investment banking firm. She found a job teaching 3rd grade at a private school in the city, shaping young minds and coming home with stories about her students that made her entire face light up. Then Rachel found out about Marcus's gambling. He had lost $50,000 at a casino in Atlantic City. $50,000 in a single weekend. It was money they did not have. Money he had charged to their joint credit cards, and a loan he had taken out in both of their names without her knowledge. He sobbed when she confronted him. They seemed like real tears, anyway. He dropped to his knees right there in their living room and begged her to forgive him, swearing it was a one-time mistake, promising it would never, ever happen again, saying all the things desperate people will say when they get caught but are not ready to change. Rachel used her inheritance to pay off his debts. Her grandmother had worked for 50 years as a housekeeper, cleaning toilets and scrubbing floors for wealthy families who likely never even knew her name. When she passed away, she left Rachel $50,000. Every single penny she had managed to save over a lifetime of back-breaking work. Rachel gave all of it to Marcus without a second thought, without any bitterness, because she loved him, because she believed in their marriage, and because she believed that is what a wife was supposed to do. I told her she was insane. We were in my apartment in Queens, drinking wine from coffee mugs since all my wine glasses were broken, and I looked her straight in the eye and said something I remember perfectly. "Girl, the only thing you should be gambling on is if he will remember your anniversary, not your retirement fund, not your grandmother's life savings, not your whole financial future." She just laughed and told me I worried way too much. She said Marcus had learned his lesson. She said every marriage hits a few bumps, and this was just one of theirs. I wanted to believe her. I really did. Around that time, Rachel began what she described as a little hobby. She had designed some teaching materials for her own classroom, things like lesson plans and worksheets that her students really enjoyed. A coworker suggested she try selling them online on a site called Teachers Pay Teachers, and later on, Etsy. "Just for fun," Rachel said. "For a little extra money, maybe we can pay for a vacation one day." Marcus was completely dismissive. He came home one afternoon while Rachel was on her laptop, designing a new lesson about butterflies and their life cycles. He glanced over her shoulder with a smirk that made my own fist tighten when Rachel told me about it. "That is adorable, honey," he said. "You should stick to teaching and leave the business stuff to me." Rachel just smiled and nodded and went right back to what she was doing. But I know my best friend. I know her better than anyone, or so I thought. And I saw a flicker in her eyes when she recounted that story, a spark of something I had never seen in her before. It was not hurt or disappointment or even resignation. It was something sharper, colder, something that looked almost like a plan taking shape. Looking back, I believe that was the exact moment that everything shifted. The moment Rachel stopped being the innocent girl from Tennessee who believed in happy endings and started becoming someone else entirely. Someone patient, someone strategic, and someone dangerous. But I did not get it back then. I could not see what was truly happening behind my best friend's sweet smile and gentle nature. I thought she was just coping with a bad situation. I thought she was adjusting to her new life. I thought she was doing what women have done for generations when they feel trapped in a difficult marriage with no easy escape. I had no clue she was building an empire. 6 months before the funeral, Rachel was 6 months pregnant and was more stunning than I had ever seen her. Pregnancy suited her, defying all the horror stories you hear from other women about swollen ankles and morning sickness and skin that breaks out. She was simply luminous, soft and glowing in the most beautiful way, with one hand constantly resting on her belly as if she were protecting something incredibly precious. And of course, she was. We met up for lunch on a Thursday in early spring at a small cafe in Brooklyn that served that kind of expensive avocado toast that social media influencers only pretend to eat. Rachel was already there when I walked in, seated at a table by the window with the sun lighting up her face, looking like a classic painting of a mother-to-be. But something was off. I could tell the moment I sat down. There was a faint tightness around her eyes that her smile could not conceal, a tension in her shoulders that hinted at sleepless nights and heavy thoughts. "Tell me what is wrong," I said, skipping the small talk. We were too close for that. Rachel took a long, deep breath. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a credit card bill. "I found this last week," she said. "Look at the charges, the third line from the bottom." I looked. It was a jewelry store, Tiffany & Company, with a charge for $4,300. "He bought me jewelry," Rachel said, her voice completely flat. "Except he never gave me any jewelry. Not a necklace, not earrings, not a bracelet, nothing." "Maybe it is a surprise," I suggested, even though the words sounded weak as soon as I said them. "Maybe he is saving it for a special occasion." Rachel just shook her head. I checked our closet, his drawers, his office at home. There is no little blue box hidden anywhere, no receipt to pick something up later, nothing. So where did $4,000 worth of jewelry from Tiffany go? Rachel's eyes met mine, and what I saw in them made my stomach clench. It was not surprise or confusion or even really anger. It was pure resignation. It was like she had known the truth all along and was just waiting for the proof to finally appear. "That is what I need to find out," she said quietly. She did not go home and confront Marcus immediately. That was not Rachel's way anymore, as I was learning. She had spent too many years watching her mother handle difficult men with grace and intelligence, too many years understanding that information is power and that the person who reacts first does not always win. Instead, she hired a private investigator. His name was Mike Callahan, a retired detective from the New York Police Department who specialized in what he politely called domestic surveillance. Rachel paid him with money from her online teaching business, which she told me was doing pretty well these days. I did not think much about that comment at the time. Pretty well could mean almost anything, a few $100s a month, enough to pay the investigator's fee without touching the household accounts that Marcus watched like a hawk. At the time, I had no real understanding of what pretty well meant. The photos arrived in less than a week. Rachel called me on a Wednesday night. Her voice was unnaturally calm, the kind of steady tone a person uses when they are barely holding themselves together. She asked if I could come over. Marcus was working late, and she needed me to see something. I rode the subway to her apartment on the Upper East Side. It was a stunning place with high ceilings and beautiful crown moldings that I had always secretly admired. Rachel opened the door with puffy, red-rimmed eyes. She was clutching a large manila envelope against her chest like it was a dangerous object. And it was. With trembling hands, she carefully laid the photographs out on her dining room table. The images showed Marcus with a blonde woman at a restaurant in Tribeca, their heads leaning closely together. One picture showed his hand gently covering hers on the crisp, white tablecloth. Another showed Marcus and the same woman entering the lobby of a boutique hotel in Soho, with their arms wrapped around each other. The final set of photos showed Marcus and the woman on a beach, which the geotag identified as Martha's Vineyard. They were walking hand in hand at the edge of the water, looking just like a couple on their honeymoon. The woman was Jessica Crane. She was 28 years old and a junior associate at Marcus's investment firm. She had 87,000 followers on Instagram, where she shared carefully staged photos of a glamorous life. I suddenly realized my best friend's husband was paying for all of it. "How long has this been happening?" I asked, even though I was not sure I could handle the answer. "The investigator thinks it has been at least 8 months," Rachel said, "but possibly longer, since before my pregnancy. It might have started before I even knew I was going to have our baby." We just sat there for a long time in silence. The pictures were spread between us like evidence at the scene of a crime, which, in a way, they were. I finally asked, "What are you going to do?" Rachel's jaw became firm. "I am going to think," she said. "I am going to make a plan. And then, when I finally act, I will be prepared for anything that happens next." She waited another full week before she confronted Marcus. I did not realize it then, but she used that time to prepare herself with incredible detail. When she finally brought up his affair, they were in the kitchen of their gorgeous apartment. Rachel was completely calm and in control. She held the photographs in her hand and asked him a simple question. "How long has this been going on?" Marcus made no attempt to deny it. He offered no apology. He did not get down on his knees to beg for her forgiveness, like he did when she found out about his gambling problem. Instead, he went on the attack. "You have been so boring since you got pregnant," he said, and each word felt like a physical blow. "All you ever talk about is the baby. You talk about colors for the nursery and finding pediatricians. You obsess over which stroller to purchase. It is draining, Rachel. I come home after a long day at work, and I need to talk with someone who can hold a conversation about something besides pregnancy symptoms." Rachel just stood there, 6 months pregnant. A hand moved instinctively to cover her stomach as she took in every single word. "Jessica understands the kind of pressure I am under," Marcus went on. "She actually appreciates what I do for a living. She does not complain about me coming home late for dinner or putting in too much time at the office. She is supportive. She is exciting. She is everything you were before you became this incubator." An incubator. He called his pregnant wife an incubator as casually as someone might talk about the weather. But Marcus was not done. It seemed years of cruelty had been building up inside him, held in check by the thinnest layer of decency he still possessed. Now that poison was pouring out of him like toxic waste from a broken drum. "What are you going to do about it anyway? Are you going to leave me? With what kind of money? You have absolutely nothing, Rachel. You are nothing without me. That salary you earn as a teacher would not even cover the rent for a tiny studio in this city. And that little craft business of yours, selling lesson plans online, please, that is just a hobby. It is not a real income." He took a step closer, towering over her and using his size to intimidate her. "Your mother was just a waitress in a roadside diner, and you are exactly like her. A nobody. You are a charity case. I am the one who pulled you out of that trailer park. I gave you a life that you could never have dreamed of on your own. Everything you own, everything you have become, is all because of me." His voice became a whisper, which was somehow more menacing than if he had been screaming. "If you ever try to leave me, I will ruin you. I will take this home, I will empty our bank accounts, and I will take the baby. My family has the most powerful lawyers in New York, lawyers who have been working for the Morrisons since before you were even born. Your family has nothing, no influence, no connections, and no money. You could fight me in court for years, and in the end, you would be left with absolutely nothing. You would be right back where you started, penniless, all alone, and living in some cheap apartment. You would only see our daughter on weekends, if you are lucky. Is that really what you want? Is that the kind of life you want for our child?" Rachel said nothing. She could not speak. Her voice was gone, lost in the shock of his cold-hearted words. She was hit by the crushing realization that the man she had married, the man she had loved and sacrificed for, the man she had believed in, had never really existed at all. The moment he left for his night with Jessica, she drove to a parking garage on Fifth Avenue. She sat there for 2 hours, crying until she was completely empty. Her eyes were swollen, her throat was raw, and her hands had cramped from gripping the steering wheel. She called me from inside that car, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. I wanted to drive right into Manhattan, to hold her and tell her it would be okay. But she would not let me. She said she needed to think. She said she had to figure out what to do. I learned something that day that has stayed with me always. When a man tells you that you are nothing without him, he is not making a threat. He is making a confession. He is telling you his own greatest fear, the truth that keeps him awake at night, the one he cannot bear to face. He is terrified that you will realize he is the one who is nothing without you. He is afraid that all of his power, his money, and his connections are meaningless if you choose to walk away. He knows he has built his entire identity on keeping you small. He is scared that if you ever stood up to your full potential, he would be exposed as the pathetic, insecure little man that he has always been. After those 2 hours in the parking garage, Rachel wiped away her tears. She took out her cell phone and dialed a number I did not recognize. "Tom?" she said, and her voice was steady now. It had a coldness to it that sent a shiver down my spine when she told me about it later. "It is Rachel. I think the time has come. Set everything in motion." That was the moment I finally learned the truth about my best friend. It was a secret she had kept hidden for 6 years, building it quietly while everyone around her just saw a sweet teacher who sold worksheets about butterflies online. Her business selling teaching materials was not some little hobby. It was not something that just paid for a vacation every now and then, or a fancy dinner. It was a $47 million company named Edu Spark Digital. It was the largest independent platform for teacher resources in the entire United States. The company had hundreds of thousands of subscribers. It had partnerships with school districts all across the country. It had income from subscriptions, licensing deals, and corporate training programs. Rachel had built the entire thing by herself, one piece at a time. She worked in the early mornings and late into the night, all while Marcus believed she was just grading papers or creating lesson plans. She had incorporated the business in Delaware long before they got married. She put everything into an irrevocable trust that her husband could never get his hands on. She had hired a team of employees, negotiated major contracts, and made brilliant strategic decisions that had transformed her small side project into an empire. And Marcus had absolutely no idea about any of it. He honestly thought she made maybe $200 a month from selling her worksheets. He truly believed she was nothing without him. He was convinced he held all the power in their relationship. He thought he could threaten her with being poor and with losing custody of their child, believing she had no other option but to do what he said. He was about to find out just how mistaken he was. 3 days after the fight with Marcus, Rachel had a meeting with her attorney, Thomas Whitmore. They met in a small cafe in Brooklyn that she picked on purpose. Knowing that no one from their social circle on the Upper East Side would ever go there. I was there with her because she insisted. She told me she needed a witness, someone she trusted completely, who could confirm that every action she was about to take was legal, documented, and beyond any doubt. Tom Whitmore had been friends with Rachel's mother for many years. He had worked on a case in Betty's Diner a long time ago, back when he was a young prosecutor, just starting out and handling small-town crimes. Betty had kept him supplied with coffee and pie. She had listened to him complain about the long hours and the difficult defendants, and the two of them had started an unusual friendship that had continued ever since. So, when Rachel needed legal help to start her business, she called Tom. When she needed assistance structuring her company to keep it safe from a husband she was already starting to distrust, she called Tom. And when she finally understood that her marriage was based on a foundation of lies, and that she needed to protect herself and her unborn child, she called Tom. He laid out all the documents on the cafe table with the smooth skill of a man who had done this exact thing 1,000 times. But even so, I could see a spark of deep satisfaction in his eyes as he described what Rachel had created. The company is protected in an irrevocable trust, he explained, keeping his voice quiet, even though we were in a private corner booth. It was legally formed before you were married. It was funded completely with money that you earned on your own. Marcus has zero legal claim to any part of it. He cannot get to it. He cannot get rid of it. He cannot even know that it exists unless you decide to be the one who tells him. He tapped another file. In here is a full record of his behavior, his gambling losses, financial crimes, and concrete proof of the affair, complete with dates, places, and photos. It details every lie he ever told you, every promise he shattered, and every time he went into your joint bank accounts without your permission. I just stared at that huge stack of papers, at the sheer amount of proof my best friend had gathered without any of us even having a clue. How long have you been collecting all this? For 6 years, Rachel answered calmly. It started the very first time I found out he was gambling. I knew right then that something was deeply wrong, even though I didn't want to admit it to myself. So I began to keep a record of everything just in case, just in case. She had been married for 8 years, and for 6 of those years, she had been quietly and systematically preparing a case against her own husband. She was getting ready for a day she prayed would never arrive, but she was far too intelligent not to be prepared for it. So what do we do now? I asked. For now, we wait, Tom said. Rachel has to deliver the baby safely. We have to make sure the child's future is secure before we make a single move, and we also have to ensure that when we finally do act, Marcus has no way out, no hidden money, no legal tricks, and absolutely no way to twist this and use it against Rachel. Rachel simply nodded, her hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly. And I found something else, she added, something that changes the entire game. She then told us about his Costa Rica plan. Marcus was getting ready to empty their joint accounts right after the baby was born. He had already purchased plane tickets for himself and Jessica. His plan was to grab every penny he could and vanish to a country that doesn't send criminals back, leaving Rachel with a newborn baby and a mountain of debt. He has been moving money in small amounts for months, Rachel explained. So small that they wouldn't raise any red flags. I only noticed because I have been watching our finances like a hawk. Then she smiled, but it was not a sweet smile at all. It was the smile of a chess master who just saw her opponent walk straight into a trap. He has no idea that I know, she said. He doesn't have a clue that I have been 10 steps ahead of him for years. He thinks I am a fool. He thinks I am weak. He thinks I'm trapped with no options. And that is going to be the biggest mistake he ever makes. I remember walking out of that coffee shop with a tornado of feelings churning inside me. I felt pride for my friend, who had shown more resilience and strategic genius than anyone I knew. I felt fear for the storm that was coming, for the fight that was about to begin. And I felt something else, something I couldn't quite identify at the time. Oh, maybe it was the realization that the woman I thought I knew, my kind-hearted Rachel, who would cry during commercials, adopt stray animals, and design lesson plans about butterflies, had also been secretly building a $47 million empire, while her husband assumed she was just playing the role of a housewife. "Document everything," she said to me as we headed toward the subway. That was her final piece of advice, the wisdom she had gained from 6 years of surviving a marriage to a man who would have gladly ruined her. Take screenshots, make recordings, save bank statements. When you are up against someone who has more power than you, information is the only weapon you have. Build an arsenal, Claire. You never know when you might need it. I thought it was solid advice back then, the kind of thing you hear and agree with, tucking it away in your mind without ever thinking you will actually use it. I had no idea how quickly those words would become my lifeline. The weeks that followed were filled with tension, but also with hope. Rachel played her role flawlessly. She was the loving, pregnant wife who didn't suspect a thing, who worried about nursery paint colors and debated baby names while her husband continued his affair with more and more boldness. She would smile when Marcus came home, late, smelling like Jessica's perfume. She would nod understandingly when he claimed his weekend trips were work emergencies. She just waited and watched and wrote down every single detail. She called me one afternoon, her voice buzzing with excitement. I found his entire escape plan. All of it. The secret accounts in the Cayman Islands, the plane tickets to Costa Rica, and the fake passport he had made for himself. A fake passport. It seems he's been planning this for a lot longer than I first thought. He has a whole separate identity created, just waiting for him to use the second things get messy here. She let out a laugh, and it was the sound of pure victory. He has no idea that I have copies of every single thing. He thinks his secret little email account is safe because he chose a password he was sure I would never figure out. He doesn't know I installed a keylogger on his laptop 3 years ago. Oh my God, Rachel. I know, she replied, sounding almost giddy with triumph. I know it sounds extreme, but you have to understand, Claire. I have been living with this man for 8 years. I know exactly what he is capable of, and I understood from the very beginning that if things ever turned sour, I needed to have an insurance policy. So what are you going to do with all of it? Nothing for now. I am going to wait until Hope is born, until she is safe and healthy and completely protected, and then I am going to burn his entire world to the ground. It was the first time she had mentioned the baby's name to me. Hope. She was naming her daughter Hope, and in that moment, despite all the chaos, I truly believed everything was going to be okay. I believed that Rachel had thought of everything, that she was going to come out on top. I should have known better than that. I should have remembered that life doesn't follow a script, that even the most perfect plans can fall apart when faced with something nobody could have seen coming. But I didn't know what was about to happen. None of us did. 3 terrible events occurred in just 2 weeks, one right after the other, like dominoes set up to fall in a pattern designed by pure cruelty. Any one of them would have been devastating. But together, they nearly demolished everything Rachel had worked so hard to build. The first disaster hit without any warning. Rachel was at Jefferson Elementary School, speaking to a classroom filled with parents at a normal conference about their children's reading skills. She was in the middle of explaining how much one struggling student had improved when she felt a sudden, sharp pain in her stomach. It was followed by a rush of warmth down her legs. She glanced down and saw blood pooling on the floor beneath her. The next few hours were a chaotic blur of sirens, hospital hallways, and doctors speaking in serious, urgent voices. They needed to do an emergency cesarean section at 32 weeks. The baby was coming far too early. The placenta had broken away. They had to operate right away, or they would lose both of them. Hope Morrison was born at 4:15 in the afternoon on a rainy Thursday in September. She was 4 pounds, 2 ounces of pure fight and was immediately rushed to the neonatal intensive care unit. There, tubes and machines would keep her alive while her tiny body struggled to learn what it wasn't yet ready to do on its own. Rachel survived the surgery, but just barely. She lost a terrifying amount of blood, and her blood pressure dropped so dangerously low that the doctors weren't sure she would survive the night. But she did, because Rachel was never a quitter, and because she had way too much left to do to just give up. She finally woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later, feeling as weak as a newborn kitten, her whole body a painful symphony of exhaustion. The first thing she asked for was hope. The second thing she asked for was her phone. She couldn't set her plan in motion from a hospital bed. She couldn't meet with Tom Whitmore, or keep an eye on Marcus's bank accounts, or get the legal papers ready that would protect her daughter. Every single day she spent recovering was another day that Marcus might figure out what she had been building. It was another day he might find a way to turn the tables on her. Another day he might escape to Costa Rica before she had the chance to stop him. I visited her every single day, bringing magazines she never opened and smoothies she could hardly sip. I watched her get more and more stressed as her body refused to heal on her schedule. She was supposed to be strong right now. She was supposed to be in control. Instead, she was stuck in a hospital bed, relying on doctors and nurses and a husband who visited for only a few minutes at a time. The first disaster was the loss of everything: her time, her strength, and her control. The second disaster showed up 3 days later, and it was a visitor Rachel never saw coming. Diana Morrison walked into the hospital room carrying a bouquet of flowers and a cashmere blanket for the baby. She was dressed with a casual elegance that likely cost more than I make in a month. She pressed a kiss to Rachel's cheek, with lips that had never known real warmth, and then settled into a chair as if she planned on being there for a long time. "I am here to help," Diana said, her voice sounding deceptively sweet. "Marcus is swamped with work, and you need someone to take care of you. We are family, after all." Rachel was too exhausted to put up a fight, too tired to see the hungry way Diana's eyes kept glancing at her phone on the nightstand and her laptop in the corner. She was too medicated to recognize the wolf that was circling her, cleverly disguised as a concerned relative. I showed up that afternoon to see Rachel, bringing her favorite cookies and a new book I hoped she would like. When I pushed the door to her room open, I expected her to be alone or with a nurse. Instead, I saw Diana Morrison leaning over the bedside table, holding Rachel's phone. She was scrolling through something with a look of intense focus. Rachel was fast asleep, oblivious. The machines next to her bed beeped in a steady rhythm, feeding her medicine to keep her sedated while her body tried to heal. She had no clue what was happening just a few feet from her bed. "Diana," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut steel. She glanced up, and for a split second I saw it all in her eyes: victory, satisfaction, the look of a predator that had finally trapped its prey. And just as quickly, it vanished, replaced by a friendly smile that could have fooled anyone who was not paying close attention. "Claire, my dear, I was only checking to see if Rachel had any urgent messages. You know how she gets worked up about her little business." Diana placed the phone back on the table and gracefully collected her belongings. "I have to go now, but I will be back tomorrow. Please make sure she rests." She then glided out of the room as if nothing was wrong, leaving behind the lingering scent of expensive perfume and a cold, sinking feeling in my stomach that something awful had just occurred. The second Diana was gone, I snatched Rachel's phone. I could not unlock it, but the lock screen showed the recently used apps: email, notes, and documents. All of them had been opened within the past hour. I gently woke Rachel and told her what I saw. As I explained, the color drained completely from her face. Her hands shook as she took the phone from me, confirming in her history every single thing Diana had opened. There were emails about the divorce, text messages to Tom Whitmore, and documents that mentioned Edu Spark, including its $47 million valuation. "She knows," Rachel whispered in horror. "She knows absolutely everything." Later, we pieced together what happened next. Diana called Marcus that very night. She told him about Rachel's secret company, the divorce papers she was preparing, and all the evidence Rachel had collected against him. She spilled every single secret. The next morning, Marcus Morrison descended on the hospital like a hurricane. He stormed into Rachel's room just as she was attempting to breastfeed Hope for the very first time. Her body was still weak, and her mind was hazy from the medication. The baby was having trouble latching, and Rachel was already crying from frustration when her husband suddenly appeared, standing over her bed with pure rage in his eyes. "You think you can just leave me?" His voice was a venomous whisper, quiet enough to go unheard by the nurses in the hall, but sharp enough to wound. "You think your silly little teacher website is a threat to me? I know everything now, Rachel. My mother told me all of it." He leaned in so close she could smell the coffee on his breath. "I will ruin you in court. I will take Hope away from you. My mother will testify that you are mentally unstable, that the pregnancy broke your mind, and that you are an unfit mother. You will never lay eyes on your daughter again." Hospital security finally escorted him out 10 minutes later when a nurse heard Rachel's sobs and came to check on her, but the harm had been done. All of her careful strategies, her detailed preparations, and her dreams of a clean escape were destroyed by her mother-in-law's betrayal and her husband's fury. She cried for hours after he was gone, clutching Hope in her arms until she had no tears left. She cried until her eyes were swollen completely shut and her voice was gone, right up until the monitors at her bedside began to sound an alarm. That was the second disaster, the loss of her secrets, her advantage, and her element of surprise. The third catastrophe was the most devastating of all. In the days that followed, Rachel's health took a sudden and drastic turn for the worse. The doctors called it an infection, but they seemed baffled by how aggressive it was. They gave her powerful antibiotics, but nothing worked. Her fever soared, and her organs began to show signs of distress. Her recovery, which should have been moving forward, had gone into a complete and total reverse. I started noticing a pattern during Diana's visits. She now came every single day, acting deeply worried, and bringing a special herbal tea from a wellness brand in Connecticut. She insisted it would help Rachel heal. "It is an old family recipe," Diana would say, pushing a warm cup into Rachel's shaky hands. "My grandmother swore by it. My mother used it. It has healing abilities you just cannot get from a pharmacy." Rachel drank the tea mostly to be polite and to keep the peace. She was too weak to start another fight. The night after Diana's third visit with the tea, Rachel's heart monitor started blaring. "Code blue," a calm voice announced over the hospital speakers. "Crash cart to room 417. I was in the waiting room when I heard it, having dozed off in a chair because I had not left the hospital in 3 days. I heard the announcement, and a cold dread washed over me. I knew it was for Rachel. I sprinted to her room and pressed my face to the window, watching in horror as a team of doctors and nurses rushed to her bedside. Her heart had stopped. Her organs were shutting down. She was dying right there in front of my eyes, and all I could do was stand there and pray. I prayed to a God I was no longer sure I even believed in. They revived her twice that night. After the second time, they warned me she might not make it, but she did. She always fought back. When she finally opened her eyes the next morning, I was right there, holding her hand as if I could keep her tethered to this world by my will alone. She looked at me with a startling clarity that cut through the fog of medication, and she said three words that changed the course of everything. "Diana is poisoning me." "Rachel," I began, ready to brush it off as a delusion brought on by the fever, as anything but the truth. My gut was already screaming. "I saved the cup," Rachel said, her voice faint but firm. "The last cup of tea she gave me. It is in the drawer of the nightstand. Get it tested, Claire. And make sure you get samples of my blood and hair from the hospital, with a documented chain of custody." She gripped my wrist with a surprising amount of strength. "I am not going to survive this. I can feel it, Claire. Whatever she is giving me is winning, but I refuse to let them win. Not Diana, not Marcus, none of them. She made me promise her that day. She made me promise to play the video she had recorded, to make sure everyone was watching when her story was told, and to protect Hope no matter what happened. I gave her my word, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. I just did not realize at the time what it would cost me to keep that promise. 3 weeks after Hope was born, on a rainy Tuesday morning, Rachel was moved to hospice care. The infection had raged on, defying every antibiotic they tried. Her organs were failing in slow motion, shutting down one by one, like someone turning off the lights in a house after a party is over. The doctors were stumped and deeply frustrated. A healthy 32-year-old woman should not be declining this fast, they kept saying. There has to be something we are not seeing. But I knew exactly what they were missing. I had sent the teacup to a private lab for analysis, paying for it with money from a secret emergency account Rachel had told me about. The results would not be ready for a while, and time was something Rachel no longer had. But I knew, deep down, what the report would say. Diana Morrison had been poisoning her own daughter-in-law, slowly and deliberately, with the kind of patience that suggested she had been planning this for a very long time. Detective Sarah Brennan found me in the hospital cafeteria the day before Rachel was moved. She was a tough-looking woman, 45 years old, with 20 years on the force, with the kind of knowing eyes that have seen the worst of people and somehow kept going. "I knew her mother," Brennan said, as she sat down across from me with a cup of stale-looking coffee. "Betty Johnson. I worked a case at her diner a long time ago, back when I was a rookie who still thought she could save the entire world. She was the sweetest lady. Her daughter was, too, from what I can recall." The detective took a long sip of the awful coffee and looked at me closely. "Something is not adding up here. Healthy young mothers do not just waste away like this. The doctors are all scratching their heads, and that usually means there is something they are not looking for because they are afraid of what they might find." "What are you trying to say?" "I am saying that I am looking into this, quietly, off the record, until I can find something real. But if you know anything at all, that could explain why this healthy young woman is dying." In that hospital room, this was the moment to tell me. I explained everything about the teacup, about Diana's constant visits with her herbal tea, and about Rachel's certainty that her mother-in-law was poisoning her. Brennan listened quietly, her face growing more serious with every word I said. "Get me that lab report," she demanded when I was done, "and any other notes Rachel kept. If this is what I suspect, we are going to need every single piece of proof we can find." Rachel spent her final days in a hospice room that had a window looking out onto a garden she was too frail to ever walk in. The late afternoon sun poured through the glass, painting the entire room in a golden light. The medical machines by her bed beeped softly, counting down the time she had left. I sat beside her every day, just holding her hand, talking about everything and nothing at all. There were times she was perfectly clear, as sharp as she had always been, even with all the medication and her failing organs. Other days, she would just drift, whispering about butterflies, lesson plans, and a little girl named Hope she would never get to see grow up. On her last clear day, she had me make another promise. I wrote letters, she told me, her voice so soft it was almost a whisper. I wrote them for Hope, one for every birthday until she turns 18, for her first day of school, her first heartbreak, her graduation, and even her wedding day. Tears streamed down my face. "Rachel," I began to say, but she gripped my hand with a surprising amount of strength. "Let me finish. I wrote letters for all of it, for everything I am going to miss, for all the things I wanted to say to her. My words will be there for her, even when I cannot be." She took a ragged breath. "And I wrote something else, a different kind of letter for Marcus, for Jessica, and for Diana. The type of letter they will not be able to brush aside, deny, or act like they never received." She gave a small smile then, a weak and sorrowful one, but it was still fierce. It was still Rachel. "They think I am dying as a weak, broken woman. They believe they have won, that they got away with everything, that the girl from the trailer park is finally getting what was coming to her. They have absolutely no clue what is about to hit them, Claire, no clue at all. For 6 years, I built a $47 million empire right under his nose, while my husband believed I was just making worksheets about butterflies and the life cycle of frogs. I beat him at every move, and he never even realized we were playing a game. If that does not make me good wife material, I do not know what does." She let out a soft laugh that turned into a cough, her entire small frame shaking from the effort. "Promise me you will play the video. Promise me that everyone will be watching, especially Diana, especially Marcus, and especially his little Instagram princess." "I promise," I said, and I meant it with every part of my soul. "Promise me that you will look after Hope, that you will raise her to be a strong woman. Tell her about me, the real me, not the victim they are going to try to paint me as. Tell her that I fought all the way to the very end. I promise. Promise me you will complete what I started." There is a folder in Tom Whitmore's office, and it is marked Phase 2. If Marcus ever makes a move against Hope, if he ever tries to take what belongs to her, you take that folder and you burn his entire world to the ground. I promise, Rachel. I promise you all of it. She passed away at 3:47 in the morning on a chilly Tuesday in October. I was the only person with her, holding her hand as the monitors went flat and the room fell silent. Nurses came in and out. The hospice chaplain spoke words that I could not hear. Outside, the rain that had been falling all day had finally let up, and the very first sign of dawn was starting to brighten the sky. Her final words came out in a whisper, so quiet I almost did not catch them. "Make them watch, Claire. Every last one of them." "I plan on it," I told her, even though she was already gone. "I certainly plan on it." The attorney, Thomas Whitmore, stood at the podium in St. Andrew's Church. Holding the envelope in his weathered hands, 200 people held their breath, all waiting to find out what Rachel Morrison had left behind. Marcus was sitting in the front row with Jessica next to him, looking more irritated than he was concerned. He clearly thought this was just a formality, a quick reading of a basic will that would leave him everything as the husband. He had no idea what was about to happen. "I, Rachel Ann Morrison, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." Whitmore's voice was strong, and it carried to every corner of the church. He read the introduction slowly, intentionally building the suspense, in a way that made even me want to shout at him to just get on with it. Then he arrived at the first bombshell, and the entire atmosphere changed. To my daughter, Hope Elizabeth Morrison, I leave all of my shares in EduSpark Digital, a company I founded and built from the ground up over a period of 6 years. These shares will be held in a secure trust, which will be managed by my friend and sole trustee, Claire Bennett, until Hope turns 25. He stopped for a moment to let the weight of that statement settle. At the time of my passing, EduSpark Digital was valued at $47 million. Current estimates predict the company's value will reach $80 million within the next 2 years. A collective gasp was clearly heard throughout the church. Marcus's head shot up, and his expression went from bored to confused, and then to something that looked like pure terror. "That is not possible," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. She created lesson plans. She earned $200 a month. Whitmore looked down at him with the patient disgust of a teacher looking at a particularly dense student. Mrs. Morrison was the sole owner and chief executive officer of EduSpark Digital, which is the largest independent teacher resource platform in the United States. The company was founded before your marriage and was held in a trust that kept it legally separate from any marital property. You were not aware of its existence because Mrs. Morrison made the choice not to tell you about it. Diana Morrison jumped to her feet. "This is fraud." She concealed assets from her husband. "That is against the law. It is perfectly legal," Whitmore answered calmly. The company was started before the marriage. All of its growth was paid for by the company's own profits, not with money from the marriage. I have documents stretching back 6 years that prove Mrs. Morrison built this business on her own, without any financial help from Mr. Morrison. "I suggest you sit down, Mrs. Morrison." Diana did not sit down. She just stood there, trembling with fury, until Marcus finally pulled her back down to her seat. Marcus was trying to regain his composure. I could see him adjusting his tie, forcing his face into a calmer expression. "Fine," he said. "Whatever. As Hope's father, I will be the one to manage the trust until she is old enough. The money will stay within the family." Whitmore did not even blink. "I am not done yet, Mr. Morrison, and I believe the next part will address your thoughts on parental rights." He clicked a button on a remote, and a large screen lowered from the ceiling behind the coffin. Rachel's face appeared, recorded in her hospice bed, only a few days before she died. She looked awful, so thin and pale, with dark circles under her eyes. Her body was clearly giving out, but her eyes were still blazing with life. They were fierce and almost amused in a way that made my heart ache with both pride and sadness. "Hello, Marcus." Her voice was fragile, but came through the speakers clearly. "Jessica, Diana, if you are all seeing this, it means I am gone, and you are probably feeling pretty good about yourselves right now." She let that hang in the air for a moment. "You are surprised about the money, of course, but you figure you will work it out. You think you will get custody of Hope, take control of the trust, and find some legal loophole that your high-priced lawyers missed. You believe you have won because people like you can't even imagine a world where a person like me outsmarts you." She paused again, and a small smile appeared that sent a chill down my spine. "You have no idea what is about to happen, so sit down, be quiet, and pay attention. Class is in session." The video kept playing, and with every second that passed, the world that Marcus, Jessica, and Diana Morrison had built began to crumble. "Jessica," Rachel said, "I want to thank you. I know that probably sounds weird, but just listen. When I first discovered you were having an affair with my husband, I was completely shattered. I cried for 3 days without stopping. I thought my entire life was over. That everything I had built had been torn down by a 28-year-old social media model who could not keep her hands off of another woman's husband. She paused, and her smile became razor sharp. But then I got angry, and after that I got smart. And when I began to look into Marcus's secrets, I mean really look into them, I discovered something fascinating about my own life. Something I had never even thought to check before. Documents flashed on the screen behind her, DNA test results with official-looking formatting and letterhead. Marcus, Hope is not your daughter. The entire church erupted. People were yelling, gasping, and jumping out of their seats. Marcus's face turned as white as a sheet, his mouth just opening and closing without a single sound coming out. I had an affair, too, Rachel went on, her voice steady in the middle of the chaos. It was just once, 3 years ago, right after I found out about your first big gambling debts. The ones you swore up and down were just a one-time thing. I met a man at an education conference who actually treated me with respect. He looked at me like I was a human being, not some trophy or a charity project. He actually listened to me when I talked instead of just waiting for his own turn to speak. She shrugged on the screen. I am not proud that it happened. I was raised to think that marriage vows were sacred, but I am not sorry it happened either. The DNA test is officially attached to my will, and it has been witnessed and notarized. You have no biological relationship to Hope. She has no parental rights and no legal claim to custody. My attorney will reach out to the man who fathered her, and the decision to be a part of her life will rest solely with him and my daughter. Marcus looked as if he was about to be sick. Next to him, Jessica sat frozen, the blood draining from her perfectly made-up face. And now for Diana, my beloved mother-in-law. Diana recoiled, as though she had been struck, her polished exterior shattered, revealing something truly hideous beneath. Rachel's voice stated, "Detective Brennan, I am aware you are present. I made a special request for Tom to invite you." I saw Brennan make her way through the attendees, her badge already on display, her face set in the neutral expression of a professional who knew this moment was coming. "I have reason to believe Diana Morrison has been poisoning me," Rachel declared. "She brought me herbal tea in my hospital room each day. I kept the final cup. That cup is now secured, as evidenced by my attorney, Mr. Whitmore, with a fully documented chain of custody." Diana made a move to get up and head for the aisle. Brennan was quicker, blocking her way with an effortless authority. "I also managed to save my own blood and hair samples from the hospital," Rachel added, "which are also documented and held as evidence. We expect the test results to come in any day now. I have a strong feeling they will reveal high levels of thallium, a heavy metal that creates symptoms of natural illness and is almost impossible to find without very specific tests." Diana's voice escalated into a shriek. "This is madness!" She was completely paranoid. The pregnancy must have affected her mind. "I have never poisoned anyone in my life." On the screen, Rachel seemed to have predicted this exact outburst. Diana will likely claim I was mentally unstable, paranoid, and delusional. However, I was a straight-A student and a National Merit Scholar. I created a $47 million company while everyone around me assumed I was just making worksheets about butterflies. Does that sound like a person who has lost touch with reality? The third bombshell landed with the force of a physical blow. "Marcus, let's discuss your job, especially the $2.3 million in gambling debts you owe to some very dangerous individuals in Atlantic City, and the embezzlement you've been conducting at Morrison and Associates to pay for those debts." A series of documents filled the screen: bank statements, wire transfers, betting slips, a complete paper trail that snaked through shell corporations and offshore accounts, all of it perfectly organized and explained. "I've already sent copies of all this to the SEC, the FBI, the IRS, and your company's ethics committee. By Monday morning, your law license will be gone. By Friday, you will most likely be wearing handcuffs. And as for those men in Atlantic City who have been so patiently anticipating their payment, they will be quite interested to hear that their debtor can no longer afford to pay them back. Marcus was now shaking, a visible tremor running through him as sweat beaded on his forehead. His $3,000 suit suddenly seemed like a cheap costume he could no longer pull off. But Rachel had more to say. "Oh, Jessica, my dear, one last thing." Jessica, who had been trying to discreetly distance herself from Marcus, froze on the spot. "I am aware that you have been selling Marcus's insider trading secrets to Greg Holloway, his greatest business competitor. I have the emails, the Venmo records, and the text messages in which you referred to Marcus as a useful idiot who is too self-absorbed to realize he is being manipulated." A text conversation appeared on the screen. Jessica's face crumbled. "Marcus, your mistress has been systematically ruining your career from the inside while you were preoccupied with ruining me. She has been on your enemy's side this entire time, giving him every bit of confidential information you were foolish enough to tell her. You were convinced she loved you. She saw you as just a stepping stone. In my opinion, that makes the two of you a perfect match." Marcus spun toward Jessica, his eyes filled with rage. "You were feeding information to Greg?" Jessica's composure completely fell apart. "Marcus, I can explain everything. It wasn't what it looked like. I was only trying to protect myself if things fell apart. You were selling my secrets. I could end up in prison because of what you did. Oh, that is unbelievable." Jessica's voice rose to a scream. "You're the one who embezzled company funds. You're the one with massive gambling debts. I just made certain that I would be financially secure when you finally managed to ruin everything." They screamed at each other there in the front row of the church as 200 guests watched and dozens of phones captured every single word. What was supposed to be my best friend's funeral had turned into the most shocking reality television show anyone had ever seen. "Never underestimate a woman who seems quiet," Rachel's voice said from the screen, cutting through the bedlam. "Still waters are not just deep. Sometimes they conceal a tidal wave, and sometimes that tidal wave has had 6 years to learn the precise location of every single fault line." Police cars pulled up to St. Andrew's Church less than 20 minutes after Rachel's video concluded. Detective Brennan had requested backup before the second revelation, anticipating what was about to happen and getting ready to act on 6 years of carefully collected evidence. Diana Morrison was led from the church in handcuffs, her protests echoing against the high ceilings. She tried to use her family's name, her attorneys, and her social standing in Connecticut society, but none of it made a difference. The police officer leading her to the waiting patrol car seemed completely unimpressed by her objections. "I have rights," Diana yelled. "I demand to see my attorney. This is slander. That woman was mentally ill. I never gave anyone poison." The lab reports were returned 2 days later. Thallium, exactly as Rachel had predicted, a slow-acting poison that builds up in the body over time, causing symptoms that look like infection and organ failure. Diana had been administering the poison to her daughter-in-law for weeks, perhaps even months, with the cold patience of someone who had thought through every single step. She was destined to spend the rest of her days in a prison cell. Marcus was handed federal subpoenas before he even had a chance to leave the church. The SIEC, the FBI, the IRS. His firm terminated his employment by the end of the day, releasing a public statement that described him as a disgrace to his profession and a source of shame for the legal world. His accounts and assets were frozen while the investigation proceeded. The plane tickets to Costa Rica, tucked away in his desk, would go unused. The loan sharks came looking for him 3 days later. Marcus had been denied bail because he was a flight risk, so he was safe in federal custody when two very large men appeared at his vacant apartment demanding their money. They went away empty-handed, but not discouraged. Men of their kind have very long memories. Jessica Crane was taken into custody on 17 charges, including insider trading, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, and being an accessory to financial crimes. Her booking photo was all over the internet within a few hours. Her mascara was streaked, her hair was a mess, and her expensive dress was creased from her time in the holding cell. Her Instagram followers plummeted from 87,000 to under 8,000 in one night. The comments were brutal. This is what you get for choosing a married man over your own morals. Imagine throwing everything away for a man who is already losing it all. She genuinely believed she was the main character. Surprise, she was actually the warning. I observed everything happen from a distance, feeling a confusing mix of victory and sorrow. Rachel had achieved her goal. She had outmaneuvered every person who had ever dismissed her, and she had done it even after she was gone. But she was still gone, and no amount of revenge could ever change that. A couple of weeks after the service, Greg Holloway got in touch with me through attorney Whitmore. When we met, he seemed anxious, nervously playing with his coffee cup, in a manner that was completely different from the cutthroat businessman Marcus had always portrayed. He was 40 years old, successful, and dressed in a way that spoke of wealth without being loud about it. However, it was his eyes that truly grabbed my attention. They were kind and sincere, filled with a sadness that reflected my own. I loved her, he admitted softly. Rachel, we were only together for 3 months, but I truly loved her. She was the most incredible woman I had ever known, brilliant, strong, and funny, yet somehow totally oblivious to how amazing she was. He glanced down at his hands. She was hesitant to leave Marcus. She thought she could repair the marriage, find a way to save it. She kept insisting she had made a promise and that she needed to try everything before she could walk away. By the time she accepted that the marriage was broken beyond repair, she was already pregnant, and that's when everything began to unravel. He pulled out a photograph. It was Rachel on a beach somewhere, smiling for the camera with her hair blowing in the breeze. She seemed happier than I had seen her in a very long time, maybe ever. I had no idea about hope, Greg confessed. Not until I heard about the DNA test at the funeral. Rachel never mentioned she was expecting my child. I believe she was trying to keep me safe, or maybe she was trying to protect herself. She was certain Marcus would ruin her life if he ever learned the truth. He looked up at me, his eyes glistening with tears. I want to be a part of Hope's life. I want to help raise her and provide her with everything Rachel would have wanted for her. This isn't about the money, the inheritance, or any of that. It is because she is my daughter, and loving her is the only way I have left to continue loving her mother. I looked at him from across the table, this man that Rachel had picked, even if it was for a short time, even if it was a secret. I could see in him what she must have seen, a sense of kindness, of honesty, a real person in a world filled with men like Marcus Morrison. Hope is going to need a father, I finally said. She will need someone who will cherish her for who she is, not for what she might represent. Are you capable of being that person for her? Yes, he answered, without a moment of hesitation. I can. I will. I give you my word, Claire. I kept my promise to Rachel. Over the next few weeks, we established a plan for joint custody. I would act as Hope's legal guardian, while Greg would be her acknowledged biological father. He established trust funds, college savings, and provided everything a child could ever want. More importantly, he was there every single day. He learned how to change diapers, prepare formula, and sing lullabies that would lull Hope to sleep. He was present because he wanted to be, not because he felt obligated to be. That was the moment I finally let myself believe that we were going to be all right. 1 year went by, the seasons turned, and life moved relentlessly forward, even when grief made each day feel like a struggle. I passed the bar exam on my very first try. I was now a licensed attorney, inspired by Rachel, and driven by a sense of purpose I had never known. The trust provided me with a salary as Hope's guardian. It was enough that I could finally stop worrying about paying rent and begin to build the future Rachel would have wanted for us. Hope was flourishing. She was a happy, healthy 1-year-old with her mother's eyes and her father's easygoing smile. She giggled at everything and reached for the world with a simple joy that served as a constant reminder of why Rachel fought so hard to protect here. My daughter Lily, who was now 9 years old, had declared herself Hope's official big sister. She read bedtime stories, helped with baths, and informed everyone she met that her baby sister was the smartest and most beautiful baby in the whole world. Greg had moved to New York just to be near us. He rented an apartment 2 floors above me in the same building, close enough to be a part of Hope's everyday life without disrupting the unconventional family we were creating. Greg and I were not in a romantic relationship. We were something different and maybe even more resilient, partners in the most important venture either of us had ever been a part of. Edgewood Park was also thriving, now valued at $80 million, with forecasts showing it would reach $100 million within the year. Rachel had personally selected the new chief executive officer, left extensive notes for the company's future, and established an endowment that would finance scholarships for children of single mothers for generations. It was called the Betty Johnson Scholarship Fund, honoring the woman who had worked her entire life to give her daughter opportunities she never had. Betty herself was now settled in a comfortable house in Tennessee, which the trust had paid for. She had finally retired from the diner, stopped working double shifts, and at last had the time to work in her garden and video call her granddaughter every Sunday afternoon. Hope's first birthday party was small, but it was perfect. Pink balloons floated all around my apartment. A homemade sign that read, "Happy First Birthday," Hope and Lily's uneven handwriting, hung on the wall. The guest list was small but essential, consisting of Lily, Greg, Betty, and Tom Whitmore. The people who loved Rachel and would now love her daughter in her absence. As everyone got comfortable, I brought a small television into the living room. Rachel made videos for Hope, I told them, one for each of life's milestones. Her first birthday, her first day of school, her first heartbreak, graduation, and her wedding day. She asked me to play them. The room grew still. Rachel's face came into view on the screen. She was in her hospice bed, but she had put on some lipstick and done her hair, trying to look like her old self even as her body was failing her. The medical equipment was visible in the background, a reminder of her final days, but she had positioned the camera to make it less noticeable. That was so like Rachel, always thinking about the little details, even as she was dying. "My darling Hope," she began. Her voice was weak, but full of warmth, filled with a love that a simple recording could not diminish. "Happy first birthday, baby girl. If you are watching this, it means I am not there to hold you, to kiss your cheeks, or to watch you smear cake all over your face and laugh at the mess you've made." She smiled, and for just a second she looked almost healthy, almost like the Rachel I had known for 25 years. "I am so sorry I could not stay. I fought so hard, Hope, harder than I have ever fought for anything in my entire life. But some battles just cannot be won, not in the way we want them to be. Sometimes, fighting means knowing when it's time to let go and trusting that the people you leave behind will continue your legacy. Her eyes shined, but not a single tear fell. Rachel had always been stronger than anyone ever imagined. I need you to know something important. Everything I did in my life, everything that mattered, I did it for you. I did not build a company because I loved money or success, or even proving people wrong, though I will admit that last part was satisfying. I built it because I knew you would need to be protected, because I knew there would be people in this world who would try to take what is rightfully yours, who would look at you and only see an opportunity for themselves. I wanted you to have armor, resources, and independence. I wanted you to never have to rely on anyone else to survive, so that when you choose to let people into your life, it would be because you wanted them there, not because you had no other choice. She took a shaky breath. Be brave, Hope. Be kind. Be smart. Work hard, but not so hard that you forget to laugh. Love deeply, but not so deeply that you lose yourself. Stand up for people who cannot stand up for themselves. Question everything, especially the people who tell you not to question them. And Hope, one more thing. The most important thing I will ever tell you. Her eyes locked onto the camera lens, looking directly at us through the screen, across time and death itself. Never, ever, let anyone tell you that you're nothing. Without them, you are everything. You are my everything. You are Rachel Morrison's daughter, and that means you are stronger than anyone knows, including yourself. I love you forever and always, no matter what happens, no matter how far apart we are. Happy birthday, sweetheart. The video ended. Everyone was crying. Betty pressed a tissue to her face, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Greg held Hope close, his cheeks wet with tears, whispering something too quiet for the rest of us to hear. Even Tom Whitmore, who I had never seen show any emotion other than mild, professional interest, was wiping his eyes with the corner of his handkerchief. Lily pressed against my side and wrapped her arms around my waist. She is not really gone, is she, Mama? As long as Hope has those videos, no, baby, I said, pulling her close. She is not really gone at all. 3 days later, a letter arrived at my new law office. It had no return address and was postmarked from the Federal Correctional Facility where Marcus was awaiting trial. I opened it with steady hands. Whatever he had to say could not hurt me, could not hurt Rachel, and could not touch the future we had built from the ashes of his betrayal. Claire, the letter read, this is not over. My lawyers are looking into the DNA evidence. Something does not add up. And when I prove that Hope is mine, I am coming for custody. I am coming for the trust. I am coming for everything Rachel stole from me. See you in court, Marcus. I should have been afraid. A year ago, a letter like this would have sent me into a panic, but I had spent 12 months learning to think like Rachel. I planned for contingencies, built up arsenals of information and documentation, and prepared for exactly this moment. I picked up my phone. Tom, it is Claire. He sent a letter. Yes, threatening custody. I know. Rachel prepared for this. I pulled open my desk drawer. Inside was a thick folder I had never opened, labeled in Rachel's neat handwriting, Phase 2. If he threatens Hope, open only if necessary. I broke the seal and began to read. There were documents, photographs, recordings, and a USB drive labeled Insurance, and a handwritten note from my best friend, written in the final weeks of her life. Claire, if you are reading this, Marcus is still fighting. Some men never learn. They get knocked down, and they get back up, and they keep swinging, not because they believe they can win, but because they cannot imagine any other way to exist. Phase 1 was the funeral, the revelations, the arrest, and the public humiliation. I hoped that would be enough. I hoped he would just go away and leave hope and peace, but I knew him, Claire. I knew him better than anyone, better than he knew himself. So I prepared phase 2. He has no idea what I found during those 6 years I spent documenting his crimes, what I saved, what I held back, waiting for exactly this moment. He thinks the funeral was everything. He thinks I showed all my cards. He is wrong. Finish him, Claire. For me, for Hope, for every woman who has ever been told she is nothing without the man who is destroying her. Love always. Rachel. Peace. Tell Hope her mama says hi, and tell Marcus checkmate. I smiled the same smile Rachel had worn in her hospital video, confident, fierce, and ready. Rachel, I said softly, you brilliant, terrifying, magnificent woman. How many more surprises did you leave me? I started reading through the folder's contents. Names, dates, and evidence of crimes that made the funeral revelations look like parking tickets. There was enough ammunition to keep Marcus in prison for decades, to destroy what little remained of his reputation, and to ensure he would never pose a threat to Hope or anyone else ever again. Outside my office window, the city sprawled in all directions, millions of lives playing out their own personal stories. Somewhere in a federal jail, Marcus Morrison was probably patting himself on the back for his threatening letter, thinking he still had some power, still had some moves to make, still had a chance. He was dead wrong. Rachel had made absolutely sure of that. I took out my phone to call Tom Whitmore to start phase 2, to finish the job that my best friend had started. Justice takes its time, I thought, thinking of the words that had appeared on the screen at the end of Rachel's funeral video. But she never forgets. And neither would I. And that is the story of how Rachel Morrison, a woman that everyone looked down on, a woman they called trailer trash, and boring, and nothing without her husband, proved every single one of them wrong from beyond the grave. She taught all of us something very important today. Never, ever underestimate a quiet woman. Never think that her silence means she is weak. And never, for 1 second, believe that money and power will shield you from the consequences of being cruel. If this story touched you, if it made you feel angry, or gave you hope, or made you think of your own inner strength, I really want to hear from you. Leave a comment down below and tell me, what would you have done if you were Rachel? Would you have fought back in the same way she did? And if you know somebody who needs to hear this story today, someone who might be feeling trapped or helpless or like they have no way out, please share this with them. Sometimes a story is the one thing someone needs to remember just how strong they really are. Hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you never miss another story. Because on this channel, we believe in justice, we believe in karma, and we believe that the quiet ones are always the ones you have to watch out for. Here's what Rachel's story teaches us. Your silence doesn't mean you're weak. Your patience doesn't mean you've given up. And when someone tells you that you're nothing without them, remember, they're actually confessing their own greatest fear. They're terrified that you'll realize you are the one with all the power. If this story gave you chills, if it made you think about your own strength, or if you know someone who needs to hear this today, drop a comment below. Tell me, what would you have done in Rachel's shoes? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because stories like this don't just entertain. They remind us who we really are. Share this with someone who's been told they're not enough. Sometimes one story is all it takes to help someone remember their own power. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful lessons and inspiration to our viewers. Thank you for being part of this journey. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. I will see you in the next story.